Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 1st of June 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
Behind the technical desk, Nick Green. Well, the weather. We're pleased to say that there's some sunny spells in Glasgow, so well done if you're north of the border. Rhyl not looking too good. It's a bit grey and blustery there. Manchester overcast. Bright in Exeter, but we understand that there's some adverse weather being forecast, which no doubt will be due to global warming, Mike. Global warming, and according to Britain's Intellectual Daily Telegraph, that global warming, of course, brought on by beavers and ground squirrels in the tundra of Siberia. So if you're worried about the weather, you're not getting enough sunshine, it's down to the beavers and the squirrels. Don't believe us, read the Telegraph article. Well, serious stuff going on. The UK column's been warning for many years of the danger of politicised NLP. We've talked about common purpose, we've talked about the use of NLP for socio-economic political agenda. And of course, one of the organisations that's been absolutely hammered by this process has been the NHS. If you haven't read it yet, do have a look on the UK Column website for Towards a Million Change Agents, which was an excellent investigative article into common purpose and effectively NLP in the NHS. Well, we received this a couple of days ago, and a person very kindly emailed in to say thank you very much for the warnings that the UK column has put out about NLP and the NHS. Got it out there. The message was very simple. I Facebook messaged Brian Gerrish to thank him for his specific video on NLP that I found very helpful after being very ill and working at the NHS and having taken a year and a half off work due to problems. That was after working and experiencing Steps to Wellbeing programme as well as other e-learning training packages. My boss, who'd been so awful to me at the NHS, I believe had undergone diversity training, and that led me to having to go on to the Steps to Wellbeing. After watching Brian's video, I can only say thank you. My full story is available to you should you need an example. Finding out NLP is actually a type of hypnotism, and having been so unwell and not able to function for over a year and a half, it aged me about 20 years in the past year and a half, and I'm grateful that I'm now a lot better. So I wanted to thank Brian. Well, we'd like to thank the person that sent that in very much, because this is really excellent feedback for us. And I'm going to say straight away, I'm sure there are many trained NLP people out there who say, oh, well, this is not true because we learn NLP to use it in a therapeutic sense, to which we say we are not talking about that use of NLP. We're talking about NLP being buried in training programs where those partaking of the training have absolutely no idea what's being done to them, nor have the practitioners carried out any risk assessments on the mental state of the people that they're using these techniques on.
They continue, particularly the BBC, continues to cover the use of these types of applied psychology, NLP and mindfulness in particular, are the ones that they seem to focus on, and they keep referring to the potential risks, and the response that comes back generally from somebody who's involved in the practice simply says there are no risks. And of course, we know that there are risks, but the BBC doesn't seem to want to actually delve into that question any further. They just let that statement pass. Now, perhaps they're leaving themselves open to some kind of legal issue in the future on the basis of that. I don't know, but it does seem incredible that nobody is prepared to discuss the risks of this type of applied psychology used in this political sense.
Well, of course, for any consultancy to say there are no risks to NLP is the most unbelievably dangerous statement, because it is totally untrue, particularly when, as I've already said, the practitioners in the examples that we're talking about, have no idea of the mental state of the people they're using these techniques on. So I think it would be wonderful if we had a group of people prepared to take a group action on the basis that did they give their permission to have this sort of manipulation of their minds? Well, the answer is no. This should be taken into court, I believe. It's a form of assault. But of course, we've got the Conservative government's own behavioural change unit boasting that not only can it change people's behaviour, they won't even know it's happened. Dangerous stuff. Well, the BBC, of course, not very good on child abuse unless it's trying to debunk the myth of child abuse, but their bias knows no bounds. Let's have a look at this. It's a report on the named person scheme north of the border, and it says named person, critics step up campaign. Well, typical BBC article. We just thought we'd pull it apart a little bit. So let's have a look at the positive spin. The initiative, part of the Children and Young People Scotland Act, is already being rolled out. It means every child in Scotland will have a named teacher, health visitor or other professional looking out for their welfare. All positive stuff. Ministers have said the person would act as a liaison between the child, their family and access to any services they may need. Good, positive point. Those in favour also believe it would help stop vulnerable children slipping through the net. Very big plus there from the BBC. 3 good, positive points for the named person. And then we come into the typical BBC bias. However, critics, and then we have a special emphasis on Christian groups. So the inference is, of course, here that it's only those nasty little Christians that have got any problem with this. And, well, they're sort of saying it's anti-democratic and, well, it sort of diminishes the role of parents. What does the BBC then do? Well, of course, it says, don't worry about this because it's going to be put in front of a panel of 3 judges and they're going to consider the case. So, to me, this is just outrageous.
Sorry, these would be judges with some experience of children, perhaps?
Well, maybe they've got some experience of children, but I thought we'd just bring this up immediately afterwards. Thank you very much to the person who sent this through to us. This is a Diary of Injustice in Scotland, an excellent website. What are they doing? Well, they're posting yet more information showing the hypocrisy of the judges in Scotland who sit in judgment of other people, but they don't want to reveal their own interests. So they are desperately trying to keep a lid on who they're connected to. But these are the people who are going to judge the people who are warning of the dangers of the named person scheme. Well,
Law Society Gazette here. This is a fantastic article. Courtroom abuse sparks new Mackenzie friend fears. And of course, there has been a rise in the use of Mackenzie's friends as opposed to solicitors in the recent years because of the level of perceived corruption within the legal system and the judiciary. But the Law Society Gazette here pointing out that perhaps at least the bar is concerned that the judiciary themselves are a little more relaxed about the use of Mackenzie's friends in courts compared to their own position. Now, what is a Mackenzie's friend? A Mackenzie's friend is a lay legal advisor. It's got a statutory a statutory limitation around it, what Mackenzie's friends are allowed to do. And some people are going into courts on behalf of or with litigants on a paid basis as Mackenzie's friends, and that's quite an interesting development. Sorry, Nick, just put that back up again if you could. I just wanted to highlight one particular section of this article. It says they're talking about the fact that the judiciary is holding a sort of investigation into the use of Mackenzie's friends in courts, and they're saying the latest Bar Council minutes highlight fears that the judicial report will take a more accommodating line than the bar. Susan Jacklin QC, chair of the Family Law Bar Association, told a meeting that the judiciary does not share concerns that Mackenzie's friends, quotes, are cannibalising work that the bar should be doing. And really that seems to be the biggest problem that they've got with it, Brian. It's not that these people may be going into courts unqualified or that they're causing extra problems. It's really coming down to whether there's a financial issue here. They're taking away
profit. Taking away profit. But of course, this is absolutely right that everybody we're dealing with who's contacting us, certainly about the family courts, are saying you simply cannot trust law firms because they're doing dirty deals behind your back while you're trying to look after your own case. And of course, we've had Melanie Shaw, who got to the point of sacking her law firm. I think that was VHS Fletcher's. She said, "You're not doing your job. I don't want you anymore." So this is the precedent. But one of the things we have seen is a sort of increasing effort by the legal system to control Mackenzie's friends. Yeah. So we need to get them registered. We can see the drift towards that. And I think I'd better just say that we also understand that acting as a lay litigant advisor does actually break away from the bounds over the judge's rules on Mackenzie friends. But what's worrying the legal profession? Well, they're taking profit away. Well, on the subject of law, we better come on to the police. And again, thank you very much to a viewer for sending this article from the Bedfordshire, local Bedfordshire paper. Ads on cop cars considered in bid to raise revenue. And if you get hold of this article, you'll read the extraordinary story that it's being proposed to the Police and Crime Commissioner, Ollie Martins, and he's been discussing it with politicians, that these poor police, they're so desperate for money that they're going to need to put adverts on the police cars. And then in comes the soft sell, excuse the pun, which says, well, it could be okay if they were the right sort of adverts. So the police joining in with the corporations to cream off money for advertising, but they remain police who are serving the public.
So we already have the situation where we've got multi-agency arrangements between the police, local authorities and various other bodies, which we're already seeing is causing certain offences to be covered up, particularly in the child abuse area. And now we're going to have the police taking money from private corporations to advertise on the sides of cars. Where does that leave the public in the event that that private corporation, which is helping fund the police, therefore then commits an offence? Do the police just simply refuse to investigate?
Oh, well, I can't imagine that would happen, Mike. I mean, I can't imagine there would be any fraud and corruption in a big corporation and then the police would fail to investigate. Really? No. Okay. So we'll wait and see what happens. We just added a bit of comment there because let's remember that first of all we had the unaccountable private police company, ACPO, Association of Chief Police Officers. Then we've got the new unaccountable body, NPCC, the National Police Chiefs Council. And what sort of body is that? Well, they don't want to say. Apparently whatever it is hosted within the Metropolitan Police. So we got private companies buried inside police forces who are now going to team up with corporations to advertise. But I don't think they want the public anywhere near them.
No,
Mike. But we're still waiting for a response from NPCC. So if there are any of the NPCC staff watching, we have reason to believe you might be, perhaps you'd like to answer the UK column's simple question as to what is the legal basis of NPCC. Is it a private company? What is it exactly the setup? And we are also still waiting to know what happened to the previous assets of ACPO. Okay, we better go overseas at this point, I think.
We're starting off overseas. Here's Rand Paul speaking in the Senate yesterday, and of course this is the UK spying agencies, the NSA and so on, the attempt to get rid of aspects of the Patriot Act, or at least allow them to expire, because yesterday was the deadline for the renewal of certain aspects of the Patriot Act. and that lapsed at midnight in the United States. So the Senate basically weren't able to, this is how it's being presented in the mainstream press anyway, the Senate was not able to extend that. So that was really unfortunate. Rand Paul did a good job there. But they are going to debate the Freedom Act today, which is backed by Obama, of course. So perhaps what this simply does is delay the situation. Now, meanwhile, in the UK, we've got Big Brother Watch publishing this article today, police access to communications data. And it's pretty staggering because what they're saying here is that there have been 733,237 applications to access communications data by UK police forces. That's since the Regulation Investigative Powers Act. 244,412 requests every year, 20,000 requests every month is what it's equivalent to. 4,700, you can see it for yourself, one request every 2 minutes, Brian, in this country for access to data.
Most of that is ad data, I believe, Mike. Sorry, I'm just being a bit cynical there.
Quite possibly. Now, I've put the symbol for the Information Awareness Office in here because really this was the body which started all this, set up in 2001 under Admiral John Poindexter and DARPA. But this mentality has come right across the world. They did stir up a little bit of controversy over their choice of logo at the time. It was pretty blatant what their intention was. And of course the NSA, the programs that were begun under TIA in the States have been ramped up through the NSA and GCHQ ever since. And I'm just sort of highlighting this idea of total information awareness because of course that was the main focus of this piece of absolutely blatant BBC propaganda from I think 5 or 6 years ago. It's actually quite a good little mini-series if you get a chance to watch it. But total propaganda piece, producing the sort of the idea in people's minds that of total government surveillance on everything that we do.
Yeah, I'm going to have to give you a yellow card for BBC and good in one sentence, Mike.
Well, of course the BBC broadcast it, but the question is whether they actually made it or not. That's another question.
Yeah, well, there we go. So the state's busy looking into all aspects of our lives. This, of course, is David Cameron's Britain in 2015. Not the Soviet Union, roles reversed. We'll be having a look at Putin after a little bit of advertising.
Right, so a number of people have been asking why we're only doing a news program Monday, Wednesday and Friday this week. That's because we're heavily testing the new website, which we're intending to put live over the weekend. So basically, on the weekend, this coming weekend, the UK column website will be down for that whole weekend while we do some pretty major upgrades. Now, there's going to be a much stronger focus for the membership on this website, not just forums, but a lot more functionality. I'm not going to say any more about that just at the moment. We'll have some emails going out in the next day or so on this, but lots of advancements on the website, and hopefully give us a lot more opportunity to produce actual content.
Yeah, so more content, more information, and easier to access. So it's looking pretty good.
Okay, tonight then, 7:30 tonight as usual. Crane Report is on. Then we're going to repeat this news program at 2015. Fracking Nightmare on at 9 o'clock as usual. I say as usual, but next week actually Ian will not be here, so this will be the last Crane Report for a couple of weeks, and Fracking Nightmare for a couple of weeks. And then immediately after this program, we've got something else.
We have got the interview that I did a few days ago with Stuart Dodd, former Royal Marine. He's going to be talking about some extraordinary information in relation to Britain's court system and the police, and we'd encourage people to watch it. This really takes the corruption in the family courts and indeed the corruption in Britain's police. Britain's police in many areas appear to now be out of control. You need to hear what this man has to say, and that interview will be straight after this news.
myself. I have rights. I believe in my rights, defended my country on an ideology of truth and justice, and I believe in it strongly. And now knowing that it's totally false and corrupt, I won't stand for that. I won't stand to be bullied either.
Well, just say once again that interview with Stuart Dobb will be run straight after this news programme. So encourage you, if you can, to stay on and watch it. It's quite incredible.
Well,
War,
yes. So, well, I just wanted to contrast the BBC and somebody else here. So here's the BBC article here. Ashton Carter, US will play a pivotal role in Asia. Now, he was speaking to the BBC while visiting Vietnam, and he said that the US could ensure peace and prosperity, the only way everyone gets to rise and win, he said. But he was speaking, according to the BBC, among new tensions over multi-nation claims in the South China Sea. The US has accused China of creating land that could be used as airstrips in the Spratly Islands. Now, basically what's going on here is that the Chinese have been reclaiming land close to the Spratly Islands and basically creating new islands in that little sort of archipelago. And the US is suggesting, this is the same US that is not only, well, they're not reclaiming any land, but they're basically building military bases right the way around Europe, around Russia and China.
yeah.
And they're the ones complaining that China may at some point in the future be able to set up military bases on this reclaimed land. It does seem a bit ridiculous.
Well, I would say, Mike, I'm pretty confused about this whole situation at the moment because, of course, David Cameron is busy inviting the Chinese in to take over our nuclear infrastructure. So strategic nuclear infrastructure we're going to give to French and Chinese companies. But then we've got all of this media saying that, well, actually, China is not to be trusted. It's a threat. And the Americans certainly seem to regard it as a threat. So it's a bit confusing. What do you think's going on?
Not sure yet, but while the BBC was promoting the Ashton Carter's comments, other media outlets here were not quite saying the same thing. So this is an editorial. This is a Hindu pointing out an editorial from the Global Times, and basically criticising or commenting on Ashton Carter's sort of comments. They have drawn flack from various parties, not least the Russians and the Chinese, for obvious reasons. And the hypocrisy of the United States in this is not going amiss. And in the meantime, of course, not just China, because around Russia things continue to escalate. So we've got Reuters here pointing out an RIA Novosti report of Russian military aircraft being scrambled to head off a US warship that was acting aggressively in the Black Sea. Now, you could view this as being similar type of media propaganda to what's been going on with the Bears flying through British airspace and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, or correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, but the fact of the matter is that US warships have not been sort of traditionally sailing as close to the Russian space as they are at the moment. So this is not quite the same thing. But again, I just wanted to highlight the sort of Western approach to this article where Russian military aircraft were scrambled. And I suspect this is a bit of propaganda actually from RIA Novosti. Now, Sputnik is their new website. This is Sputnik News is RIA's new website. Russian jets force US Navy destroyer away from territory. So slightly different spin on the story, but nonetheless, incredibly dangerous situation. And this is Anatoly Antonov, who's the Deputy Defense Minister in Russia. His comments, there's an obvious desire of the US to bring their Aegis-carrying warships closer to the Russian coast and place hypersonic weapons on board Virginia submarines under the concept of prompt global strike. Russia clearly particularly concerned about how close the United States getting at the moment.
Well, that's always the case, because if the threat's right on your doorstep, your reaction times are down. So the movement of these forces close to to Russian territory, Russian border, is extremely provoking. It's very dangerous. So Should we be surprised at what the Russians are doing? Absolutely not. Who is poking the stick at the Russian bear? Well, at the moment, that's clearly UK and the US with the support of the European NATO forces. So, not surprisingly, Mr. Putin has decided he's had enough of people drifting in and out of Russia causing trouble. So a few days ago, there was basically a Russian blacklist produced, which was banning some 89 politicians and connected people from Europe. Now, we were given a copy of one of the essentially leaked European lists. So we'll bring that up on screen and take you through it. You won't be able to read all of this, but you can always freeze the screen. But we just thought we'd have a little look at the British names that were flagged up. So we've got Mr. Philip Dunn. We'll show you some pictures of these people in a minute, but he's connected with defence. This one here, well, we all remember Nick Clegg. And of course, Mr. Clegg boasts that he's partly Russian, partly Dutch, unelected really to anything in Britain, former Deputy Prime Minister, and was groomed in European politics by Leon Brittan. So Nick Clegg, obviously an absolute Europhile and a man who the Russians feel they don't want near their territory. Who can blame them? Well, it goes on. We've got Edward Macmillan Scott, we've got Andrew Parker, and we've also got Malcolm Rifkin and an MP that we've had some dealings with before, Andrew Robertson. And it goes on. Who have we got here? Two more. We've got John Sawyers and Robert Walter. So quite an interesting list. If you look at other countries, there's Polish, Swedish, all sorts of names. But can we blame Mr. Putin for not wanting these people on his territory? We can't really. It's a shame we have to have them on British territory, isn't it? So let's have a look at these people. Well, here's Philip Dunn, Minister of State Defence Procurement. According to Mr. Putin, dodgy character. Nick Clegg, well, we've put him down now as Minister of Nothing. So he's finally come out of the Privy Council, has he?
He is, yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, he's no longer Lord President, but I'm sure he's still in there.
Well, he's still somewhere in one of the back rooms up to whatever he does, but he's looking a bit glum at the moment because obviously a little bit of his power's been stripped away. We've got Edward Macmillan Scott, MEP, Europhile, and he set up a very big human rights group which seems to be penetrating country after country. And I wonder whether these are the sort of people that Putin regards as subversives within Russia, as he did Stephen Kinnock. Well, no surprise that he doesn't want Andrei Parker, head of MI5. What is MI5 doing at the moment? Nobody in Britain knows, because it's obviously that the security services are virtually out of control. Putin is just simply saying, don't bother coming on holiday to Russia. Well, here he is, Andrew Robertson. We'll come on to him in due course. We've also got this gentleman, Robert Walter, former MP and international banker. So obviously there's something a little bit deep about him the Russians don't like. Well, Malcolm Rifkin, former head of the Intelligence Committee, doing a little bit of dodgy dealing with Chinese company.
That don't exist.
Or that didn't exist.
Yeah.
Maybe they were reclaiming a few islands or something. But we don't want him, Mr. Putin, so a little bit disappointed he's not going to Russia. And of course, this man, the man who was busy playing on the beach, and then his wife released it to Facebook, John Sawyers, head of MI6. But don't worry, because he's now teamed up with BP. So there we are. Can we be surprised that President Putin said, I've had enough of what's been going on in the European Union? Let's have a look at how the Western press is being ramped up for massive propaganda against the Russians and Putin. The Guardian here, well, here's the article, 89 European politicians and military leaders banned from Russia. It says it's a sign of Russia's deteriorating relations with the West after more than 6,200 people have been killed in fighting. So good old Guardian spins it, pins all the deaths on the Russian. Russia continues to dismiss accusations from Ukraine, NATO and Western powers that it's supporting the separatists. No investigation by the Guardian into the Western hand, which has been supplying arms and specialist expertise.
The Western hand that caused the regime change in Ukraine, which caused the problem in the first place.
Yes, huge amounts of European money offered, of course, to help the trouble start. This is a comment from the European Union. We take note that the Russian authorities have decided to share the list. We don't have any other information on legal basis, criteria and process. So the cheeky European Union sort of says, well, do we have any legal basis for what Putin's done? I think what Putin has done is simply put two fingers up to the European Union. So I don't think he's going to be too worried about legal basis. But it goes on. Here's the Independent. Russia bans 89 EU politicians from entering the country, including Nick Clegg. And they give a quote from Martin Schulz, President of the European Parliament, and he called the list unacceptable and it hampers any efforts for constructive dialogue. So never mind the troops on the Russian border, never mind the European whipping up trouble within Ukraine. We haven't yet got to the bottom of the snipers that were there killing people. Everything is anti-Putin. And of course, we better bring in the BBC. And they thought they'd get a better hit if they brought in the blonde. So I think this is the Swedish Foreign Minister, Margot Wallström. She's demanded an explanation from Russia. Good old Sweden has stood up there and said, we demand an explanation. I don't think she's going to get one. But it doesn't contribute to increasing the trust of Russian actions. So use my favourite word, dross BBC reporting. And the Mail's got a little bit more detail, but they're focusing on poor Mr. Nick Clegg because he's not allowed to go into the country. We just remind people that he's the former unelected Deputy Prime Minister and again, former EU Commissioner Leon Britton's backroom politics boy. Well, there we are. So, should we be frightened of the Russians? Well, I'm afraid, according to Plymouth Herald, we should, because they are back on the subject of these nasty Russian Bear aircraft. And apparently Russian bombers flying near Plymouth have gathered valuable intelligence. Let's just hold that one, Nick, if you will. We'll bring a couple of comments up. But this is remarkable. There's no real substance in this story at all. These are standard Russian recce flights. But in a bizarre article, everything is twisted around from air defence to the fact that we need maritime patrol aircraft. So the Russian bombers, which were caught flying close to the Cornish coast, are likely to have gathered valuable intelligence, senior military figures have warned. Well, of course, that's what these planes are designed to do. So if they're flying, they're busy sucking in information. They've been doing this for years, no change there. But we have this extraordinary comment. 5 retired senior RAF officers have warned that the operations could have resulted in strategic information being collected about Britain's nuclear deterrent since the government scrapped maritime patrol aircraft. Well, of course, maritime patrol aircraft have nothing to do with preventing the flights of Russian Bears. That's an air defence requirement. The UK's lack of submarine hunting planes following the decision to axe the Nimrod fleet has given opportunities for intruders, which could prejudice the security and effectiveness of Trident.
These Bear aircraft clearly have some skills that I wasn't previously aware of.
Well, this is where this article is just quite bizarre. I think what's going on is that we've got some air vice marshals clubbing up to say, well, Britain should have maritime patrol aircraft. We agree. However, the fact we haven't got those aircraft must surely come down partly to the fault of the same air vice marshals in the first place. And in any case, maritime patrol aircraft do not solve an air defence problem. So we seem to have some military officers who have forgotten that it must rest on their own shoulders that they failed in the first place. What is the Herald trying to do in this article? Russian planes flying down the coast of Cornwall. Are they spotting ice cream vans or something?
Possibly.
Right.
Can we just put that up again a second, Nick? What do you think is the actual source of this article? Because what I notice is a number of articles appearing where, of course, there's no byline. There's no journalist putting his name to this. It's by Plymouth Herald.
Yeah.
So what is this? A press release direct from GCHQ or is it
MOD?
MOD? Sorry, or is it some retired military man putting out propaganda? What's going on?
Well, my guess, Mike, is that this type of stuff is now being put out directly from central government. I don't think this is even going near the MOD. We know that over recent months there's been big trouble brewing between senior military officers and the Ministry of Defence, where the senior officers are saying they're treated like dirt by very junior civil servants. And it's obvious that Cameron's elitist government simply doesn't want to know what the military people say. So is it all bad? Well, we're going to say at least one senior British military officer has had the guts to stand up and be counted. And that's this gentleman, Jim Dutton, Governor of Gibraltar. He's resigned. And the Mail here reporting Governor of Gibraltar quits after 2 years. He said it's to do with the failure of Cameron's government to tackle Spanish aggression. But he's also been particularly upset with the Europe Minister David Lidington, who I think he regards as some form of wet. And an insider said that Jim Dutton had assumed when he was invited to become governor that it was because of his military career. He now realises it's simply to do with, ceremony. So a very senior head of the Royal Marines has said he's had enough of Cameron's pandering to the EU on this one. This is the minister that he's obviously had big problems with. David, if we have a look at his CV, before becoming MP for Aylesbury, David worked for BP and RTZ. That's an interesting background. And then he spent 3 years as special advisor to Douglas Hurd. Well, I think we just remind people, here's Douglas Hurd. We showed him on the Dirty Dozen, the men visiting West London Synagogue to celebrate the life of Leon Britton. So very interesting that the man causing the problem for Gibraltar, big fan of Leon Britton, apparently.
Yeah.
Well, we'll end on this happy chappy. Here he is. We mentioned him as one of the banned people, Mr. Robotham. He's famed for actually being particularly rude to veterans from the Arctic convoys. I think this is probably why Putin said, we're going to ban you. He compared people who'd served on the Arctic convoys during World War II, their requests for medals. He said, well, basically, this is what was dished out to Soviet generals and Colonel Gaddafi's henchmen. What a sickening British politician. We're calling him anti-British. But let's remember, he's also the politician who defended Common Purpose. When he was asked to comment on what Common Purpose was up to, he simply used his aides to look at the website and then came back and quoted what Common Purpose says about itself. This is the state of not only Britain, but David Cameron's appalling anti-British MPs. Job to find words on UK column where, of course, no bad language is allowed. Well, what else have we got?
I think that's it for today.
Okay, right. So remember Crane Report, and also stay with the channel if you can, because immediately we close the news today. We'll be doing that interview with Stuart Dodd. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back on Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Bye-bye.